deciding whether or not they would fund the project, they apparently went to some conferences and they spoke to Ethiopianists and said, now, is Professor Gervers, does he have a real subject? And they said, no, that all stopped, that all finished 500 years ago. We haven't had any new rock churches for 500 years. But I'm happy to say that they were wrong. And there's a good deal of activity. And the importance of this, of course, is that if we can document, which is what I'm doing, through interviews with these craftsmen, it will give us some insights as to how the churches, such as Lalibella's famous churches and the many, many others, were made. Can we close the door against the competition? Okay. So I have a semi-formal text here, so which I will refer to, and in an attempt to show you some of the examples that we've run into over the past few years. So let me begin formally, and then we can have some. Any time that you feel I've missed something or you can't. Can you hear in the back? Can you hear my voice? Everybody's clear? Okay. So while art and architectural historians have, over the past century, made long strides in documenting and interpreting Ethiopia's impressive repertory of rock-hewn churches, not a single publication has been wholly dedicated to contemporary examples of this ancient craft. The first to draw our attention, among the Ferengi anyway, first to draw our attention to the subject was Paul Henze, whose name may be familiar to some of you. He spent a lot of time, he's an American who was associated with the American Embassy, and he wrote a book on the history of Ethiopia, which is quite comprehensive. Anyway, Henze in 1993, that's more than 20 years ago, so 25 years ago now, was introduced to a new rock church which was being hewn at the time by someone called Alaka Halefrom Reta as a replacement for the much earlier rock-cut counterpart at Petras Paulos, just up the road here near Sada Amba in Tigray. Henze reported his discovery in a presentation made to the Third International Art Conference in Addis Ababa in 1993. In 1997, let's see if I can find my way down here. So, the page down, let's put this. Okay. In 1997, he documented a second church at Chechaho Gabriel, which was underway on the west side of the gorge separating Waro from Gayan in Gondar. The work was being conducted by several dozen laborers, then, this is 1997, paid 5 birr a day under the guidance of Abba Gebre Selassie Defar Sema. In the same year, he also visited a new rock church site at Etisa in Shoa. These last two images are the work of Abba Gebre Selassie Defar Sema. It's right on the Chinese road between Waldia and Gebre Tabor. In the same year, he also visited a new rock church site at Etisa in Shoa, the birthplace of Saint Tekle Hymenot. There, a then 23-year-old Batawi Gebre Mariam, now 41 years old, same fellow, had been working 6 days a week for nearly 3 years to carve a church out of the rock. By way of conclusion to his notes, written in 1997, Henze wrote, "The oppressiveness of Derg rule generated a resurgence of religion in Ethiopia. The process has not yet lost momentum. The cutting of new rock churches should be seen as a manifestation of this trend, this regeneration." End of quote. My question is whether the phenomenon of making rock churches is a continuation of an ancient tradition, or simply a revival thereof? This is the outstanding question for which at the moment we don't have any direct evidence, but to tell you sort of my conclusions before we get there, I strongly suspect that the rock-cut church tradition has been continuing since the 15th century. We have many churches which are not of as high a quality as those which were made in the 13th, 14th, and 15th century. And it's impossible to attach a date to them, or quite impossible, but which I suspect may be more recent than we think. Back to Henze, in March 1999, in notes which he prepared for his frequent traveling companion, Stanislaus Chojnacki, a Pole, who, I don't know if any of you are familiar with Chojnacki, but he was an early director of the Institute of Ethiopian Studies at Harvard University, and a great collector. So, preparing material for Chojnacki, Henze reported having seen 4 new rock churches carved by the late Grasmach Haile Darga in the Sarai region and located 8 kilometers north of Debre Berhan in Showa. This man, he's since deceased, but he was working in the 1990s. The upper church was called Saraya Mikael, here you have it, and there were 3 lower churches in the gorge, Talas Exavier Ab, Beta Mariam, and Beta Salasim, the smallest and at the bottom. This site, near Debre Berhan, is extremely popular today among pilgrims from Addis Ababa who come away with pulverized holy rock, which you will know be more familiar with than I, known as sabah, as a curative stone. So when you're walking around site, you'll find people pounding the rock into powder, which can then be distributed to the pilgrims who take home. And if I understand correctly, it is then added to water and drunk as a double shot of holy water. The new church near Petros Vepaulos, which is up the road here from Kelly, previously cited by Henze, was more precisely identified by an English archaeologist whose name you may be familiar with, David Phillipson, who described it as the church of Petros at Malahai Zangi, and the excavator as Abba Halafon Hekta. Excavation is reported still to have been underway at this church at Petros in 1997 and in the year 2000, and finally completed by the year 2006. From my experience, on average, it takes about 5 years for a small team to carve one of these churches out of the rock. Phillipson reported that in the same year, excavation of a new, quote, hypogeum had begun in the Amhara region in the Nefas Maucho area. This was probably the church at Tetraho Gabriel, to which Henze had also referred. Another architectural historian, Emmanuel Fritsch, who had spent some 25 years in Ethiopia, coming from France, and has now returned to France, he pointed out other places of potential interest, including, I quote, some church being hewn by a neighboring community near Adigrad. Now, I don't know where that might be yet, but I'm hoping on this present expedition to go to Adigrad and make inquiries to see if we can find it. He also referred to 3 churches carved out of the rock by a young hermit, Marigeta Gebre Pascal Tessema, at Ambaga. Now this is an extraordinary hermit who has devoted his young life at this point to carving out an enormous complex. I don't know if any of you know where Gashena is, but it's on the crossroads of the Chinese roads. You come to the crossroad and you turn to the right and you can go up to Lalibela. Just a few kilometers from this crossroad, you have the work of this Marigetta. And I will show you a few images of what he has done in literally the last few years. I've never seen him with more than 2 other people on the site. The work is largely done by him. He has had enormous difficulties with the locals, the greatest difficulty being where to put the excavated rock, which he's taken out of the ground, because the farmers don't want him to put it on their fertile land, which is understandable. Nevertheless, this is a great project, and he's becoming known. And what I'm suggesting to tourism and culture in Waldia is that when they have visitors going to Lalibela, they stop off here on the way. And one of the reasons why, first of all, Marigetta, like most of the people who are involved in making these churches, they don't hesitate to say that their dedication comes from an inspiration from God. Marigetta also wants to prove that as far as Lalibela is concerned, it would not have been necessary for the king to call upon architects and workmen from Egypt, as is sometimes thought, in order to do a work like this. His argument is this is something which Ethiopians can do. And admittedly, if you look at some of his work, that's the top of his excavation. And you can see that reasonably well. And across the valley on the other side is Lalibela. So you're not far away. The context is close at home. So he, not only is he carving out of the rock, or into the rock, but he's also carving out of the rock. So this is the first modern monolithic architecture that I have ever seen in Ethiopia. So he's truly trying to emphasize that it is possible for, and why not, Ethiopians to do this kind of work, and fine work it is. He wants in the end to finish up with, I think, 5 churches, which will mean 5 tablets and 5 additional holidays for the local neighborhood, which is another problem. I should just mention in the footnote that in Chechaho, where a priest has been working dedicated decades to this undertaking, he has encountered considerable resistance from the local community because his creation is a structure, or it's difficult to talk about structures because structures refer to built enterprises, but here we're sort of making it negative. He said that the locals are not happy because he has room for 7 tablets, and the farmers do not want to have their work interrupted on the celebration days of the tablets. So here's some more work by Marigetta, and for example, that's a ceiling decoration, and so I said to him, well, what kind of tools do you use to do this? It's absolutely amazing. So I take a piece of string, and we hold it in the middle, and then we go around in the circle. This kind of technology, we all feel that we are so dependent on modern technology, but it's amazing what you can do with a piece of string and a hammer and chisel, and hand measurements. They don't use rulers, they don't use ladders. It's absolutely amazing. At least for a Ferengi, it's amazing. Okay. Okay, with what you've seen and several other potential sites in mind, I made my way to Mekelle in February of 2015, 2 years ago, as a point of departure to pursue the subject of contemporary rock-hewn churches in Tigray. I had myself seen, in 2007, a new church in the Geralta area, called a village called Agwasa. Sorry, a bit more work from the Marigetta and Keshena. Oh, there's something else I wanted to point out. If you If you see this doorway in the background, it's an old rock church. A number of the new rock churches are built in the context or near old churches, which have been abandoned. None of them are still operational, but they've been abandoned, and so I think the point to be made here is that they are holy sites. They have a history of devotion, which is undoubtedly the reason why, in this case, Maragetta chose to make his excavation, because this is the entranceway into the church, and that's just a slightly better view of the old church, which now he uses as his forge in order to sharpen his chisels. The chisel is of great importance, and because he had no means to buy a wheelbarrow, he made one using stone wheels, which again is quite incredible, and an old piece of metal which he found. He's modernized that now. This is his new wheelbarrow. But all the work of emptying out the tons and tons of earth or rock, pulverized stone, is done with these two instruments. All right, now we're coming to Aguaza. If you take the road from Hausien to Adiabi, not very far, as you go sort of just on the edge of Tembian, on your left-hand side, you'll look up and you'll see this outcrop of rock from a considerable distance. At the very top of the rock, there is an ancient rock church, probably 14th century, but it's very difficult of access. This is the face you go up in order to get there. We all think of Debradamo, and have any of you been to Debradamo?
Yeah.
Being pulled up? Well, here they do have a chain, but there's a problem that when you get to the top, there's an overhang. And so you're kind of leaning back and going forward at the same time. I think of all my expeditions to Ethiopia, this was, I felt a little uncertain. At any rate, the elderly of the village of Aguaza could no longer go to the top. So they decided they were going to make another rock church down below. One more view of you can, if you look carefully, the old church has been blocked up. These are windows from the old church. It must have been, at one point, it must have been quite a handsome undertaking. That's just a section of it. A lot of it has in fact collapsed, which is the problem of the preservation of rock churches. Anyway, so this is the new church. And it's so, relatively speaking, easy of access. This church in Aguaza, I was told at the time, was crafted by a priest from Hausien called Maragetta Zeberhan, who apparently died just about 2 years ago. I unfortunately was not able to meet him. Hausien was already on my list as a place to visit when here at the Mekelle University in the history department I met Professor Ayala Bekerie, who told me about a craftsman in Hausien that he had met by the name of Gedai Hadush. Gedai Hadush has got a reputation for himself by carving his own home into the rock. Apparently, according to the story he told me, he had an argument with his landlord, or whoever owned the building in which he lived, and he got fed up with him, and so he went to the town council and said, "Would you please give me that rock?" And this is just, I don't know if you're familiar with the Geralta Lodge. It's just down from the Geralta Lodge. At any rate, there's a little road that runs in front of his house, and one day a priest from Tembian came by and saw this excavation and came to him and said, Atogadai, would you consider carving us a church? I think I have a little bit more information about that. Right, so this was a priest from the village of Endamariam in the Edegahamos region of Tembian. The priest, Kesis Gervers, invited Gedai about 8 years ago to make a rock-cut church in his village. Sorry, that's the Aguaza church again. Show you the full excavation. Now we're in Peralta. This is a photograph taken from the top of the hill in Hausian, looking south at sunrise towards the Peralta outcrop, in which there are many, many old rock churches, and as you'll see, some new ones. At any rate, after Gedai made this contract, it was settled on for 60,000 birr 8 years ago. Now I'll make it now 10 years ago, because I think I took that note then. But the money was too little, and after 2 years, Gedai was bankrupt. So he and his team were obliged to abandon the job, which in the end was finished by village locals who had by that time become familiar with the work. It's extraordinary. What for me is equally extraordinary about these people, none of them come from families with experience in carving rock. None of them. They are all inspired. So since the time he was obliged to abandon that project, Gedai worked predominantly at another site called Mariam Mauka, also in the Geralta region, near the road leading from Hausian again to Abyadi. This church has since been completed. That is the interior. We're looking towards the Maktas. It's very popular to put these circular forms in the ceiling. And that gives you the lines are all not quite as straight as they look, but to give us a reasonable impression of what Marimauka is all about. It's somewhere off the road that half an hour's walk will bring you to it. Gedai is now involved in the carving of another church, literally in the shadow of Hausian, called Maiweni Ende Georgis, as I mentioned, on the outskirts of Hausian. Now I begin with this brief discussion of the Maiweni Ende Georgis church by showing you this is the old church at Mariamauka. This is the old church at Mariamauka. So again, it's the old church which has been the magnet to bring the craftsmen back to the area. But that old church was abandoned before it was finished. I think they probably ran into rock which was too hard. At any rate, they now simply use it as the Bethlehem for preparing bread for the new rock church. Okay, I'm going to come back to this in a minute. At any rate, he undertook this work, the second job, a job which in order to finish, he now says is going to cost 1 million birr to complete. And the cost, he reported, was largely because the rock there is harder to carve than at Endemariam, where he was working before. I think I've put that, oh yes, good. This is out of place, I may have to come back to it. All right, so now this is Maiweni. As you can see from the relative size of the individuals vis-a-vis the church itself, it's going to be an enormous cave church. This is the south side. So, sorry, this is the north side. I'll show you subsequently where they hope to put the maktas. At any rate, this work has been going on for a number of years, but the work is never continuous because there's a constant need for funds. It's like anything, walk around the town or in the cities of Ethiopia and you find half-finished buildings, it's usually because not only in Ethiopia, that you need a new injection of funding to keep the project going. At any rate, this is quite an undertaking, and it's it was by the grace of God and good luck and the Virgin Mary that I arrived on a day when they were actually working. He had, and G'day was not present. Again, he had started the process, but then his services had become too expensive, so the village had let him go. And it was then taken over by an administrator who was a pretty savvy fellow, and a team of 8 workmen. And at the time they were working steadily from 8 o'clock in the morning, an hour's break at lunchtime, until 5 o'clock in the afternoon, banging away at the rock. This is the administrator at Maiweni at the moment. Now, yes, this man, who is now the administrator at Maiweni, had previously been a workman on the team. So he had learned the trade, as it were, from G'day. They then, I'm afraid to say that this G'day from Halcyon tended to be, I think, rather argumentative, and so he wasn't able to maintain his position. But they then called upon another G'day Yehish, who was called in also to work on Maiweni and with Gervers. For him, for G'day Yehish, this was his 4th Rock-hewn church. So all of these 4 were situated in and around the Geralta area. He, like G'day Hadush, was not employed at the moment for the same reason, that is to say, lack of funds. But the administrator had enough experience for him to be able to take over the supervision and continuation of the project in the absence of either master craftsman. So here doesn't take very much time, doesn't take very long for the local community to catch on as to what to do, and they continue on their own. It is for the more difficult things like carving a nice arch, they might call back our expert craftsmen in order to do it. This is G'day Yehish with our then interviewer. Now, this G'day, when I was asked in their profession, G'day Hadush said that he was a day laborer, and G'day Yehish said that he was a farmer, working with his home in the next valley. So again, for the work which is done, a contract is it's a serious undertaking. A contract is drawn up. For Maiweni, each of the 2 G'days who at this point were working together would be paid 40,000 birr to chisel out 4 square meters. So this is each of them. So that's 4 square meters. That's 10,000 birr per square meter. So it's expensive work. The locals contribute as much as they can by selling local farm products. Now, G'day Yehish is the son of a wood carver, and it was from his father that he learned carving. And he, as I quote him, "As I trained in wood, I carved the rock as though it were wood." It was his mother, Wezero Tebre, Safa, who was a nun, brought him to his first site some 20 years previously. 2 at least of the 4 sites credited to him pre-existed as small, presumably pre-16th century rock churches, which he was invited to expand. Like G'day Hadush, he had no previous experience in rock carving. nor did he know anybody who did. His first church at Haragwe Mikael, the church is what you see more or less in the center. The south side of the church had collapsed, and so he was invited to extend the church back into the wall. This church became, in fact, his training ground. A rock slide had demolished the north wall of the church, taking with it all but one panel of a 15th century mural. So we can see that this is heritage conservation here, and it's a good thing that he was called in, because otherwise the church would have been abandoned and left open. So there's not much left of the mural painting, but it is a rare example from, and a very good example from the period. With the north aisle now constructed of stone and covered with wood, Gideyej carved out a south aisle and a new sanctuary at its east end. So that is the aisle that he prepared, and that was the way towards the sanctuary. His handiwork can be seen in well-conceived arches, slender pillars, and a shallow cupola over the sanctuary. This Gedai's second church at Maria Magdalene is also an expansion, this time of a tiny pre-existing rock-hewn site in which only the sanctuary was carved out of the rock. This was a photograph I had taken many years ago at Maria Magdalene. And you can see, we're looking straight through into the sanctuary with the Membra Taba, which you see here again. And that was then, what you see here is the full extent of the rock-cut part of this church. They also, in order to increase its size, previously, they had built a building against the rock on the outside. But as far as the excavation into the rock was concerned, this was it. The new excavation began at a point past these figures. On one of the arches, they had these earlier figures painted, and so what was on the other side of it became what was the expanded church. Here is the priest from Maria Magdalene. He's sort of contemplating the next stage, which is to remove the sand. I mentioned to you that they don't use ladders. They begin their work from the top of the site, and they work their way down. And so everything they carve off the ceiling then becomes their stepping stone for the next stage down. So there's still quite a lot of sand inside the site, but nevertheless, here is the new Maria Magdalene. Enormous, an enormous space.